Okay, so the next topic is two topics are a little tougher. So we're going to talk about powers of I. Okay, so we have I, then we're going to have I squared, and I to the third, and I to the fourth, and I to the fifth, and I to the sixth, and we're going to keep going. Now we have to kind of recognize some patterns here. Okay, so we know from what we did the other day, I squared is equal to a -1. Okay, so think about this. How many, if you take this, I to the third is the same as I squared times one more I, right? That gives you I to the third. That's the same thing as I squared is -1 times the I. Okay, I to the fourth would be I squared to the second power. Okay, so there's two I squareds in there. So I squared is a -1, and if we square that, -1 squared is 1. I to the fifth would be, okay, how many, okay, so we can't take I squareds out right away. So it'd be I squared, well, we'll say I to the fourth times 1I, right? Okay, now to simplify I to the fourth, we know that's I squared squared times this other I here. So I squared is a -1. -1 squared is 1I. Okay, and it kind of keeps going on that in a pattern like that. We're going to have 1, -1, 1I. It'll be 1, -1, sorry, -1I, 1I, 1I. And we keep that pattern going. It'll be -1, -I, 1, and I for to the 6th, to the 7th, to the 8th, to the 9th. Okay, so some teachers might have taught you in the past to memorize this, like, is it, that pattern. I like to, they might also taught you this, and this is how I like to do it. I like to think, okay, I to the 8th. How many I squareds are in I to the 8th? Okay, so I to the 8th is I squared to the fourth power, because 2 times 4 is 8 there. Okay, so then I like to think, okay, I squared is -1, so we have -1 to the fourth, which is, remember, any negative to an even power is just 1. Okay, I to the 13th. Well, let's do another example here, okay? You guys do I to the 20th. Okay, so think about this. How many I squareds are in I to the 20th? Okay, 10. Yep. So if we think this is I squared is -1, -1 to the 10th power, which is even, is going to be 1. Okay, let's do I to the 30th. Okay, so once again, how many I squareds are there in I to the 30? It'd be 15 of them. So this is the same as -1 to the 15th, and -1 times -1 times -1, 15 times would be a -1. Hopefully you're noticing kind of that if it's an even, you can just pull out how many I squareds there are, and it's either going to be 1 or -1. Okay, so if I do I to the 84th, okay, that would be I squared to the 42nd, which is -1 to the 42nd power. -1 to an even is just 1. Okay, so we see that pattern there. Okay, now, if I think about I to the 13th, now, if I have I to the 13th, I can't say this is I squared to some power, right? Because it'd be like a decimal, and we don't want that. Okay, so what we have to do first is take an I out. So we're going to say this is I, and then you'd have I to the 12th left over. Okay, now you notice we know how to do I to the 12th just like we did all these other ones. That would be I squared. How many I squareds are in I to the 12th? I to the 6th. And then if you have -1 to the 6th power, that is a +1, times the I that we took out originally gives you I as an answer. So if it's odd to start with, you kind of have to pull one out to get it into the I squareds. Okay, I to the 56. Okay, that's even, so we can just pull it out right away. So I squared to the, Okay, 56, basically you notice you're dividing by 2, right? 28. And negative 1 to the 28th power, right, is 1. Okay, I'll give you a couple more here just to practice. Okay, let's do I to the 27th. Okay, give that a try. So I times I to the 26th. I to the 26th would be I squared to the 13th. And I squared is negative 1 to the 13th, which would be negative 1 times the I gives you negative I. Okay. Hey, next idea here. I don't know if you remember this back in Algebra 1. So 2x to the negative 4, y to the negative 6, z to the 8th, divided by a to the negative 2, b to the 3rd, and c to the negative 4. Okay? Do you remember what you did with whenever there was a negative exponent? Okay? A negative exponent moves it. Okay? So if it was negative, it moved to the bottom. So we have 2, because that's a positive exponent. This is a negative exponent, so that goes to the bottom. Negative exponent goes to the bottom. Positive exponent stays on the top. Okay, now if it was on the bottom and negative, it moved to the top. So that'd be a squared, that'd be b to the 3rd, and that'd be c to the 4th on the top. Okay, so we're working with negative exponents to make them positive if we do that. So if you look at this here, this would be the same thing as 1 over I to the 3rd. Okay, so when we're working with negative exponents, you want to move them there. And then you just want to simplify the I to the 3rd. So just like we did over here, it'd be I times I squared. I squared is negative 1, so we have negative I. So we have negative 1 over I is our answer there. Okay. So this takes us also into our next idea of the dividing part, which when we divide, we don't like I in the denominator. So what we're going to do is we're going to multiply by a number. Okay, so for example, if I have 1/2 and I multiply by, say, 3 over 3, okay? 3 over 3 is 1, right? That's just 1. So if I take a number and multiply by 1, I should get the same thing back, right? Okay, and I get 3 over 6. Now, is 3 over 6 the same thing as 1/2? Yeah, it's just different forms, right? They're really the same value, though. That's essentially what we're going to do here with this. We're going to multiply by I over I. Okay, I over I is 1, right? So if I take something and multiply by 1, I get the same thing, right? So here, if I multiply by I over I, on the top, I have negative I. On the bottom, I have I squared. Okay, I squared is negative 1 times this negative makes it a positive. Okay. Number 29, since I'm almost out of room here, well, I can maybe squeeze it in. Okay, since it's negative, it's going to move to the bottom. So 1 over I to the 53rd. Okay, we're going to pull out the I there, since it's odd. So it'll be I and then I to the 52nd. We have I to the 52nd would be I squared to the 26. I squared is negative 1 to the 26 makes it a positive 1. So I'm left with 1 over I. Now, I don't like the I in the denominator, so I'm going to multiply both the top and the bottom by I. So I get I over I squared. And I squared is negative 1. So I over negative 1 makes negative I. Okay, if you need to rewatch that, go back and rewatch it a couple times and make sure you get it. Okay, next one here. If it's negative on the bottom, it moves to the top. So this would be I to the 21st. Okay, now we're back to doing some of these over here that we've done. Okay, so pull out the I. So it'll be I times I to the 20th. which would be I times, okay, how many I squareds are there here? There's 10 of them. Negative 1 to the 10th power is 1 times I gives you I. Okay. The next thing we're going to talk about is how to get rid of i's in the denominator here. Okay, so here, this is why we did this problem right here. Remember we called this the conjugate. Okay, so 6 plus 5i, 6 minus 5i. Notice when we multiply that together, our middle terms cancel it out. We're going to do the same thing here because we don't want it left an I, right? So here I have something, I don't want the I left over. So I'm going to multiply both the top and the bottom by the conjugate, which is 3 minus I. Okay? So then it's just a lot of multiplying stuff that we did before. So 7 times 3, 21, minus 7i, minus 3i, plus I squared. And if we multiply on the bottom, 3 times 3 is 9, minus 3i, plus 3i, minus I squared. Okay, now we want to simplify them both. Okay, this is a negative 1, so 21 minus 1 gives you 20. Negative 7 minus 3 would be negative 10i. On the bottom here, this is what we wanted to happen, right? Negative 3i and plus 3i cancel out. And then this is a negative 1 times a negative here makes it a positive 1. 9 plus 1 makes 10. So notice we achieved our goal of getting rid of I in the denominator. Now the last thing we can do is divide both of these. So 20 divided by 10 is 2. 10 divided by 10 is 1i. So you have your answer. Okay, number 32. What are we going to multiply by? The conjugate, 5 plus I. So multiply it through. 3 times 5 is 15, plus 3i, plus 10i, plus 2i squared. On the bottom, 25, plus 5i, minus 5i, minus I squared. Okay, so we simplify stuff. So I squared is negative 1, makes that a negative 2. So 15 minus 2 is 13. And adding these together, that was a plus 10, right? Yep, 13i. On the bottom, yes, again, once again, the middle terms cancel out. That's what we wanted. Negative 1 times a negative makes it a positive 1. 25 plus 1 is 26. What can I divide out of all three terms? 13. So it'll be 1 plus I over 2. Okay. Give these a try yourself. Okay, pause it and try them. We were on the classroom, I'd do that. Okay, this is very similar to this one up here, right? So when there's an I in the bottom there, we want to just multiply by I. So this will be 2i plus 3i squared over 5i squared. Okay, so on the bottom here, we'll see I squared is negative 1 times 5 makes negative 5. I squared is negative 1 times 3 makes negative 3 plus 2i. Notice I switched them around because the complex is the real part and then the imaginary part. Now, another way to write this would be 3 minus 2i over positive 5, 2 if you take the negative through. Either one would be okay. Okay, this one here I'm going to multiply by I over I. Once again, that's just 1. So you get 3i over I squared. I squared is negative 1, which is negative 3i. Okay, this one here I have to multiply by the conjugate, 4 minus 3i. So multiply on the top, 16 minus 12i minus 12i plus 9i squared. On the bottom, 16 minus 12i plus 12i minus 9i squared. So on the top, I squared is negative 1 times 9 is negative 9. So 16 minus 9 would be 7 and minus 24i. On the bottom, the i's cancel. That makes that negative, makes it a positive 9. And 25 plus 9 would be, 16 plus 9 would be 25. Can't cancel anything out there. Okay, last one here. Multiply once again by the conjugate. Okay, so we have negative 36, negative 24i, inside negative 15i, and negative 10i squared. 9 plus 6i minus 6i minus 4i squared. Okay, simplifying here, this makes this a positive 10, right? Negative 1 times that. And that makes that negative 26. And negative 24 minus 15 would be negative 39i. Middle terms cancel out there. Negative makes that positive 4. Would be 13. I can divide a 13 out of all of them. That'd be negative 2. Divide a 13 out would be 3i. Divide a 13 out, you have 1. So you just have negative 2 minus 3i. Okay.